Oh, wait, what are we saying? Hi and welcome to Middleish, right? Or welcome to Middleish. There we go. Okay. And then you'll say, I'm Aaron Green. I'm Michael Gray, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I had a brain
Something
fart.
like that.
You're like, yeah, just like we've always done.
Is this a drunk episode? Can we have the drunk episode now?
You know, I thought about texting you like an hour ago and be like, hey, it's the afternoon. I could pour some whiskey. You know, we could do this. Why not? Okay, I can do this. Hello and welcome to Middleish, a podcast about moderation in all things. I'm Michael Gray.
And I'm Aaron Green.
And welcome to episode 4.
Episode 4.
Here we go. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah.
Did you have a good Father's Day?
I had a great Father's Day. Yeah, I got spoiled rotten. It was really nice.
Good.
Lots of good food. Good snuggles with my girls. Got some awesome gifts. I got this really cool thing, a productivity planner, which is just like, it's kind of like how to like better organize your days and most important tasks and all this kind of stuff that I'm bad at.
Careful, because we just told our audience how awesome and knowledgeable we are, but Michael sucks at this apparently.
Well, I get easily distracted, and organization is absolutely a weakness of mine, right? Like I do a lot of things well. Organization is one I struggle with. So getting better at it is good, right? Like I'm improving.
Yeah.
But I've been using it just the last 2 days and it's been super helpful. It's awesome. And then
Good.
I got a bag of gummy bears, which is like the best thing in the world.
Which, yeah, I didn't know that was like your thing, but it really is.
I really like gummy bears a lot. Yeah. And it was just a great day of just hanging out, playing games, snuggling, watching movies. Yeah, it was really nice. It was a really, really good day. So, yeah.
What's your go-to Father's Day food when you say you have good food besides gummy bears?
Well, Kathleen made for breakfast, she made this like stuffed peanut butter banana French toast.
What?
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
It was so good. Yeah. It was like, so I had one piece and that was plenty. It was so good. She was like, I put extra peanut butter in there for you. It was really quite something. Yeah. Delicious. And then for dinner, we got Chinese takeout, which I love Chinese. And there's a good place just a little bit down the road that we got from. And she made me cake. And yeah, it was awesome. It was a great day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, she's from Texas, right? So you show love through food big time.
And I love to be shown love through food. Yeah. That's my love language, feeding me.
That's pretty typical.
It was. Yeah. How's your weekend? Good?
It was good. Yeah, I'm involved in something not very Middleish right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's an event here in Boise called the Boise Trails Challenge.
Oh.
And it's actually an organized event that was put on in memory of a local mountain biker who sadly died on the trails a couple years ago, out mountain biking.
Mm.
So all of his buddies in the community kind of got together and put together this trails challenge to sort of memorialize his love of riding and to help people get to know a lot of our trail system. And it's been going on for a couple of years, and it's a minimal fee. You sign up, you track your rides or your runs. Some people run this whole dang thing, which I cannot even tell you.
Wow.
Yeah, not Middleish at all. So I signed up because I'm doing a lot more mountain biking and wanting to get to know the trails. And it's like 170 miles, I think, of trails. And you have a month to do it. So you don't have to go crazy and just it's not like a race. But in true Boise fashion, people turn it into a competition, and people will start at midnight it was Thursday night or Friday morning midnight when they started it this year. And they'll just ride like in one big go they'll try and do all 170 miles of trails.
Wow.
It's insane.
That's
And I
crazy.
did the biggest mountain bike ride I've ever done on Saturday, and I got 43 miles, which is coming from somebody with a road biking and triathlon background. When I would go out and ride for like 6 or 6.5 hours, I'd get, easily 120 miles or something. So mountain biking, needless to say, is just a totally different ball game and
I
outside
can
my comfort
imagine.
zone.
Yeah.
So even though I'm, approaching it from more of a, like, I would say more of an endurance, like just go hard and go big and
Hmm.
have these big long days and really attack it. I'm not doing that whole, start at midnight and ride for,
Right.
like 70 hours straight. But yeah, so that was my big weekend. I rode big on Saturday, and then Matt and I had couples therapy on the trails on Sunday.
Nice.
So yeah, that was my weekend. Lots of time on bikes, lots of time outside, and the way I
Cool.
like it.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it's not very Middleish, which is a really good unplanned segue into today and the topic, right? Is it ever okay to be kind of outside of that Middleish range, to not do things moderately or with moderation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good segue, Aaron.
I know. Thank you.
Well done.
I'm a professional.
What's that like?
I know. Yeah, I think it is funny when I talk about moderation with people, and of course that's our whole shtick, right? Is to talk about moderation.
Mhm.
But we got this really great question from a listener, our first listener question, Yahoo!
Yay! We have one.
And we do have one bona fide listener besides our parents, by the way.
Mhm.
Um, and it really got me thinking, and I think got us talking about this concept of moderation and how we present it. Um, I think one of the things we've already hopefully conveyed to people is that there's no one right way
Right.
to approach health or to approach life or to approach, goals or whatever.
Right.
And that actually goes for moderation. I think what's moderate for one person may not be moderate for
Mhm.
another, and so
Mhm.
we'll dig into that a little bit.
Yeah. No, I'm excited, and it was interesting because I just got home from the beach last week when I read your email, and there was just a lot of good questions that I think some of them were ones I tend to, when you've been doing something for so long, I think sometimes you've had so many conversations about similar things that you kind of start to assume that maybe people know things, or that kind of stuff. And I think it was a good reminder of, like, there might be some good things to explain through this, like kind of how do we maybe define moderation, or how do we see it, or in what ways is it flexible, that kind of stuff, that I think I took for granted a little bit about, everyone knows what moderation is, so let's do this thing. But I think there's some space for some really good explanation, and kind of diving into how that's a pretty personal thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the just to start with the big question. So I got this wonderful email from a listener, and I mean, just had so much really good information about, very open about this person's experience and kind of where they are in their life path, which I think is also a really important point to make, that you already kind of touched on. It's a highly individualized,
Hmm.
sort of approach. This helped me understand the big question. And in the email, the big question was, or is, are there circumstances where sweeping change is actually better than moderation? And or are there times when sweeping change for a defined period, so for example a whole 30 challenge or dry January, or if you go on some boot camp retreat or something, cleanses, whatever, um, where a sweeping change for a defined period in order to reset habits can better set a person up for moderation? Which is a really, I mean, there's a lot going on there. So first of
Hmm.
all, are there times when a sweeping change is actually a better approach than moderation? And one of the things that came to my mind immediately is when we look at things like addiction,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So the example, when I responded to this listener, I said, the example I can think of is we wouldn't tell somebody with alcoholism that you can have a glass of wine with dinner, or just enjoy it in moderation. There are definitely times, and this is a little bit outside of my scope, and I assume yours,
Yeah.
but there are
Yeah.
definitely times when moderation just isn't a realistic approach.
Right. Right. And I agree. And I think there's, again, kind of like last week, there's so much nuance here, and there is so much. It depends,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't even know. I think most of these episodes I like to have an objective of like, here's something that you can really like grab a hold of and implement. I don't know if we'll have that today, and I'm okay with that. I think maybe what we'll take out of this is maybe there are questions to ask yourself and how to kind of probe and decide for yourself. Or maybe it's something that you present with someone you trust or your coach or whatever.
Mm.
But I think, yeah, there are probably some times where a more sweeping change is more appropriate, or at least not a bad idea, right? Um, but before we get into that, I would say I think it's important to ask yourself, what would a big sweeping change bring to me that something more moderate wouldn't?
Mm-hmm.
And why am I drawn to the big sweeping change? Because if there's one thing we're all really good at, it's lying to ourselves. You know, we're really good at pulling the wool over our own eyes and
Yep.
BSing ourselves and telling ourselves we have different intentions and that kind of stuff. And so if we can first honestly look at what would a big sweeping change bring, and is it going to bring something that is more helpful or more important, that has a higher priority than moderation can bring? And if you can't answer that question in a way where it's really clear that a sweeping change is more important, then maybe it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
That's kind of my first initial thought with that, because I think we are so bombarded with big sweeping change in the health, nutrition, fitness industry. I mean, it's just such a huge majority of, it's just massive overhaul, massive weight loss in short amount of time, cutting out, entire food groups. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just so extreme that I think I think a lot of people tend to really feel like that's the only way.
Yeah.
And so if your response is, I need big sweeping change because that's the only way, big red flag, you know.
Yep.
Um, on the other side, if there's really some benefit to it, then yeah, maybe it's something to look at for at least a temporary time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things you kind of started to touch on is, when people ask themselves that question,
Mm-hmm.
what would this bring to my life? One of the things that I got from this email exchange with the great information that was shared with me was it became pretty obvious that this big change this person was wanting to make was based on almost an epiphany of realizing that habits and behaviors of the past just were not serving that belief system and that
Mm-hmm.
direction that person wanted their life to go. And we talked a little bit about this when we talked about habits and routines, how often we fall into these patterns where we're like,
Mm-hmm.
this is not serving me well, but yet it happens every day, or this
Right.
is what I do. So I think sometimes you can take a hard look at your life and realize that, like, oh my gosh, there are so many things that I'm doing that don't serve me or don't bring me closer to,
Mm-hmm.
where I want to be, that, yeah, sometimes a big overhaul could be a reasonable approach. Um, I also think there's when I hear the term like sweeping change, or if I hear somebody bring up some kind of extreme approach, there's two things that I'll want to kind of dig in and talk to them about. One is, you know, basically what's the end game here? What happens once this, because a lot of, and that was part of the question, was for a defined period, you know, we have to look at what's going to happen after those 30 days or after we do this 2-month challenge or whatever. What do you plan to do once that time frame is up?
Right.
And how are you going to assess whether things worked or not and whether they're worth continuing? The other thing, and we can talk more about each of these, or, you know, your thoughts on it. The other thing that I kind of struggle with when we hear about these programs or cleanses or reboots or any of that stuff is they tend to have like this, I don't know, like this overarching theme of this is the way to do it. This is the only way. And I think you mentioned, yeah, that's a good, yeah. I was going to say a little bit of evangelism, maybe even, you know, like this is the way, this is what you do. And I think you're right that our society has kind of bought into, we have to have this like immediate fix and this concept of like, I don't even think it's quite instant gratification. It's more like, I want to fix this issue I have like right now. I don't really want to do the work and the effort and the, you know, the ups and downs and all of this that goes with it. I just want to like, you know, decide and do it and start. And it's just, the rules are there and it's laid out, where people will often tell me like, it's just easier that way. And I'm like, is it?
Yeah. I think it is in the moment. I think and this is maybe just a piece of it, but I think we're such a, like, we seek comfort so much and we can find comfort so easily right now that at least in the moment, like we don't care about healing the wound. We can just put another Band-Aid on, right? And that's what we tend to do a lot. And so for the moment, it's fixed, right? I think that's why like emotional eating is such a big problem. Like in the moment, it works. It makes me feel better. You know, I forget about whatever. And it doesn't matter that it's not going to work long term, that I'm going to have to do it over and over and over again every day. It works in the moment. And that's all that I care about. And I think if we can just like fix it in the moment, then we're good, right? Like if I can just grab a hold of the easy comfort to feel better, it doesn't matter if there's this underlying current of deep discomfort, right? Like it's just, if I fix it on the surface, then I can pretend the other stuff's not there. And I think we're really good at that.
Or that perceived control, I think is the other thing where people, that's why they like those rules and those really firm, like do this, not that. It gives you control, or at least the feeling of control. Then what happens when life happens? What happens when your kid has a birthday party and there's snacks and cake? What happens when you are called away on a work trip and you don't have your gym available? You know, what happens when your family and your spouse or partner are just, their schedules don't align and you have like really strict demands on your time and you can't do that very rigid schedule? And I think that's where, you know, I think it's important to have those conversations with clients or even friends, you know, when they come up with some of these, you know, more extreme kinds of ideas. And again, extreme could be in the context of someone's life. I mean, you know, going out for a bike ride every single day for me is not extreme for me. For somebody else, it really could be, you know, it could be a huge demand on their time and their lifestyle and their body. So I do think it's important to have that conversation of, you know, what happens when life happens?
Right.
How are you going to approach this?
Right. Well, and I think that's the issue, is that, you know, we have these more extreme things like Whole30 or, you know, the ketogenic diet, these things that are really intense to maintain. And so if someone wants to do those, okay, like you said, it's important to go, so what do we do when life happens? Because if the only option is, okay, and get involved in this intense thing, and then when, you know, you have a birthday party and you have a piece of cake, right? Like, God forbid.
Not keto.
Right? But then the only response is, oh, well, I'm just a piece of crap who can't do this. And so now I'm going to
Yes.
tell myself all these things I tell myself every time I try these extreme things, and I inevitably can't do it forever, that I'm the problem and I'm just not cut out for this. And I'm the type of person who can't do these things. Like, this doesn't work. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think there can be times for these extreme things, or at least to try to kind of try them, as long as you are able to screw that up and still be okay with things. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think that's a
I
real
think
critical piece.
you brought up a great point there, that this is one of the challenges that I've seen is the failure, or the perception that I failed, I'm not good
Mm-hmm.
enough, and that internalizing the fact that you just couldn't do it once again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas if you were to take a step back, and something you've mentioned in a previous podcast is kind of looking at what works when we're looking at habits or routine, or kind of making some changes. What is it that's working for you right now? And how can we use that and leverage that into change? That can work in these cases, like when people are kind of wanting a sweeping change, but it doesn't have to be like these hard and fast rules on something totally new. You can take pieces of it and say, what is actually working for you? And that actually, I mean, that's something that kind of starts you from a positive place. I know I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I already have these pieces in my life that are helping me and could kind of be a springboard. So it helps. And not that failure is, and I mean, the word failure, we could talk about that too, and why that's
It's a
maybe,
tricky word.
yeah, I don't think we should avoid the word failure, and I don't think we should avoid the concept of failure, because that's how we learn and grow. It's what you do after you're confronted with that helps you, I guess, kind of like pave the path and grow from it, instead of letting it just stop you and say, oh, I failed again. And I tend to look at failure like more than, well, I didn't meet that goal. Or I didn't do what I set out to do, is kind of how I reconcile it in my head. Like, this was what I intended to do and what I wanted to do. I didn't make it there.
Right.
Where did I go right and where did I go wrong? And kind of like start assessing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, just back to this idea of like this big sweeping change versus moderation, I think that's where, if people do take that path of like a big change and they hit that brick wall and all of a sudden they're like, this is, I suck again.
Right.
You can take that step back and kind of look at it and then approach it a little differently, maybe from a more moderate standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it brings that you bring up, well, it maybe just translates into a good point of, if, for me, it's like, we can try something more extreme, but if it doesn't work out, that's not evidence that you failed or that you're not cut out for this. It's evidence that maybe this isn't a good time to do this. Mm-hmm. Because with the concept of moderation, like, I'm okay with things seeming kind of extreme as long as they're really doable, right? Like, if I know people that have done Whole30 and it's been great, they've really loved it. It hasn't ruined anything. They haven't had to white knuckle it. Awesome. Then maybe in some ways that's kind of a more moderate approach, right? Because it was really doable. I've known people that have attempted, and by day 3, they're like, this sucks. I'm out. I can't do this anymore. Okay, then that's not a good strategy, right? And I think we get so focused on like the micro, right? Like, we just look at like individual choices and, that was the wrong one, so I'm a piece of crap, right? And I've ruined everything because I did one thing, right? Versus like, and we're really bad at like stepping back and looking at things on like a grand scale. It's like, okay, so you had that cookie. In the course of the next year, does that cookie mean anything, right? Like it has so much power and weight, like emotional investment in a cookie. It's, I don't know, 70 calories, right? Like, and okay, so over the course of the next 52 weeks, it means nothing, like absolutely nothing. I can't stress how little it means,
I know.
right? But we boil things down and put so much emphasis on individual choices and actions, and we don't like the perfection, and we don't put enough emphasis on stepping back and looking at how consistent was I with these things. And that's where we just have it flipped. And so I think that can be the danger of these more extreme things, is they don't allow you to step back. Like it's like micromanaging each little moment and every little tiny, lick, taste, bite that you put in your mouth. And that's defining you, versus like stepping back and like, what matters long term? What matters in the grand scheme of things? Because I think we've talked about it before, like, sure, you can lose 20 pounds in a couple weeks. You really could, or a month. But are you going to keep that weight off for the next 6 months? If not, what's the point of doing it? Because I don't know about you, but I've never had a client come to me like, I want to lose 30 pounds and then gain it back 6 months later.
Yeah.
Like, that's never the goal. And so if we don't step back and look at like, how does this decision, how does this choice, how does this action, this program, this approach fit in the grand scheme of things, then we're kind of missing the boat. And I think that's important when we look at these more extreme things. Like, okay, so we're going to do Whole30. That's extreme for 30 days. If that's 30 days out of a year, okay, well, and the rest of it is sensible and sustainable, like you talked about, we come out of it and we move into more moderate stuff. Is it really that extreme?
And two points that you brought up. One, I think moderation and consistency go hand in hand. And I think that's where the magic happens. What can you do consistently that actually works in the context of your life? For some people, like, so for example, back to the email, this person just kind of had this epiphany, like, geez, I don't miss half of these things that I was doing and consuming and that were part of my life for so long. So in that case, it really was like, I can be consistent with this new kind of approach that I'm taking. I had a client years ago that he really wanted to try intermittent fasting. And I was apprehensive, but everybody's different, and I needed to learn a little more about it myself. And so I, after a few conversations with kind of trying more moderate approaches that were not consistent and not working for him, he just kind of had in his mind, I need to do intermittent fasting. And so I said, okay, I went and researched the different protocols and kind of read up on it, and so that I could speak intelligently. I said, well, here are the different protocols that I'm seeing that have some evidence behind them and could feasibly still result in a nourishing diet and meet your needs. I mean, because, first do no harm. Right. That's the way I approach these very extreme things, is like, could this have some detrimental effects to your health? So we looked through the protocols and he chose one, and he had done his thinking on this. So he had evening mountain bike rides where he would want to go have a beer, afterward. And he had these other things, other pieces of his life. He wanted to have dinner with his family. So it wouldn't work for him to just stop eating at 5 p.m. or something and engage in a fast for, 12 hours, whatever, 18. So we came up with a protocol in the context of his life and we talked about the different kinds of food to include. So one of the downsides of intermittent fasting is people will just go like hog wild once they can start eating, and they'll eat all the wrong, shouldn't say the wrong things, but they won't think about the quality of the food. So in that case, that individual was very consistent with this IF protocol that we came up with. And it really did work for him. And there were a few times where he was like, yeah, we had brunch or whatever. So I ate like a few hours earlier than I normally would, or a couple hours earlier. So it didn't quite follow that fasting schedule, but he was remarkably consistent and it just fit with his life. That was a learning experience for me because I wanted so badly to kind of put the brakes on that and be like, you should not be doing this. Like we can, this is not the magic bullet. We can do it differently.
Yeah.
But it ended up working for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it was important for me to support that and
Right.
to almost take this approach like, okay, if this is what you really want to do, let's try it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try it. And I will help guide you and provide you with all the information that I can find on this,
Mm-hmm.
whether what the risks are and all that, but
Mm-hmm.
let's try it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that brings up a good point, and we kind of hinted this earlier, but like if I think if it's really consistent for someone, if someone can be consistent with things, maybe that's not extreme for them. Like
Yeah.
moderation and what's extreme, it it really matters. Like you were talking about, just before that story about like the person you were talking about, where they're like, I don't miss these things and this and this.
Mhm.
Okay, so not having those things probably isn't really extreme, right? It's like we were talking before we started recording. Like I'm allergic to shellfish. I don't like most seafood. So if I never eat that stuff again, that's not extreme for me. That's pretty simple, right? Because one, I don't want to have like this awful allergic
I'm
reaction.
sad for you
I
though.
know. You're not alone. But in like other stuff, I don't enjoy it, So that's not an extreme thing. For other people, it may be. If I told them you can never eat seafood again, they'd be like,
Mhm.
oh, this is going to be so hard, right? It's not extreme for me. And so sometimes we find this where people are like, I just don't want like the ice cream that I had every evening. I just don't want it anymore.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, it's not like we're being like, you can never have ice cream again, and they're like, okay, I can do this. It's like, yeah, just things have changed. And so maybe sometimes these things that seem extreme on paper, because everything is so personal and it just so depends on the individual, really aren't that extreme. And I would say if people can do it consistently, they're probably not.
Well, and what happens with the people that tell themselves I can't eat this food or I have to go to the, gym or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and it turns into this almost compulsion, like
Right.
I can't do anything else. I don't have a choice in the matter. I mean, that has some pretty
Mm-hmm.
significant psychological effects too when
Mm-hmm.
people tell them, like, if I tell you you can never have gummy bears again, Michael,
I want you to shut your mouth.
you
How
you'd
dare you
cry.
speak to me like that?
But you would think about gummy bears and you would probably,
Exactly.
if you got your hands on gummy bears, you'd probably turn into like a wild animal and
Mm-hmm.
just
Of
eat the whole lot.
course I would.
Go to the Haribo factory and just
Right.
it's on, like
Yeah.
Donkey Kong. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
so
oh, go ahead. Sorry, I was going to cut you
I was
off.
just going to say, so I think that's another piece of this when you get into those extreme, very rigid protocols, or when people say like I've got to just overhaul my life, a lot of times they get so caught up in the things that I can't do and can do and all the rules
Mm-hmm.
that they don't think about like the psychological ramifications of that.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, I can't think of a specific movie, but I've seen it. Like when the parents tell their daughter, you can't date that boy. He's
Oh
nothing
yeah,
but trouble. And all she wants to do is date that boy real
she's
hard,
gonna
right?
sneak
That's
out at
all she's going to
midnight
do.
and
Yeah. Because once we put things off limits, they immediately are more attractive to us because we can't have them, and I've heard it and seen it over and over and over with clients, and they'll echo it when I say it back to them. It's like, if we say you can't have this, well, we're setting ourselves up for two really big problems. One, you're going to think about it a lot more just because you're going, I can't have it. I can't have that. Okay, make sure I don't have that thing. And then you're just kind of stewing on it too.
yeah,
And then the second thing is, if you do wind up giving in a little bit, right? Like, okay, I can't eat anything after 7 p.m. And then you have, a little bite of your husband's ice cream as he's scooping it out. Well, I did the bad thing, so I'm a bad person. I've ruined it. I may as well have it all, right?
yeah,
Because now it's like the scarcity mindset. Like, I can't have this stuff if I'm trying to be healthy. So when I do screw up and have it, I might as well go hog wild because I have to clamp it all down again and have none of it.
yeah.
And then we just wind up in this really nasty cycle yeah, of restriction and going hog
And
wild with it.
disinhibition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Restriction, disinhibition.
Yep.
It's a
Exactly.
very common cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this. This was the second part of the big question that our listener had.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are there times when a big sweeping change for a defined period of time in order to reset habits can actually set a person up for better moderation? Um, I have my answer. I'm curious what you think of that one.
Um, I have some thoughts. I don't know if I have a definitive answer. And I think that's because, again, I think it depends so much on the individual. My first thought is I don't know that you're going to reset habits with a big sweeping change, just because I think changing habits requires you to be pretty intentional.
Yeah.
And if we're trying to change a bunch of them at once, and we've talked about this before, like let's say 100% of my attention, right? And I'm changing 10 things. I can give each of those things 10% of my attention, right? That's not a whole lot.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to change habits, they require a lot of attention and a good deal of time. Whereas if I'm changing two things, I can give each of those things 50% of my intention or my attention, and I can do them for longer as well. And so I think that's my first thought is I don't know that that would go so well. I think it
Mm-hmm.
might go well in the micro again, but when we look back at, say we do these for 30 days, okay, well, in 9 months, are we still reaping benefits from this 30 days? Is it setting us up to have a successful month after month after month? Or is it like this crash course? I'm desperate. I've got to do something. And I need to see immediate progress so that I'm validated that what I'm doing is worthwhile. That's just the ugly
Yeah.
road that I think
Well,
people have been on over and over and over.
and to your point, something you said that I hadn't thought about before is there's almost like this external force imposed on a
Mm-hmm.
person when they engage in, say, something like the Whole30. It's like
Mm-hmm.
this overarching kind of rules and like community, especially if you've like, made a pact with a friend that you're going to do this. Very different than what you're describing about intentionally focusing on
Mm-hmm.
habit change and behavior change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something I had really thought about before, but I do think that has a lot of power when people
Mm-hmm.
have this almost external force that's like compelling you to
Mm-hmm.
change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I think so. Um, so I also think that I think there can be times where it's okay to do sort of things a little more intensely. You know, like this is probably a little over a year ago. Someone reached out to me and just said, "Hey, is it ever okay to like kind of go a little more extreme than is maybe sustainable?" Like she was saying, I'm going on vacation and I'm going to be wearing my swimsuit a lot and I want to be more
Mm-hmm.
comfortable in it. Um, and I think there can be times where that's okay. I don't know if it's ever the best plan, like in the grand scheme of things, right? But I get that. Like if you're going to be, like not wearing a lot of clothes, you want to feel comfortable in that. You want to feel
Mm-hmm.
confident in that. And so I think it can be okay at times to like, yeah, for this vacation, maybe let's get a little bit more extreme and maybe a little more restrictive than we would normally, as long as there's the understanding that once this event is over, we're going to move back into more moderate places. And the progress you made during that extreme time, you're probably not going to keep all of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's really important. You might gain a little body fat back, and you need to
Mm-hmm.
be okay with that. And I think if people can have that kind of mindset, I'm a lot more comfortable doing sort of those extreme things for short, brief periods.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but otherwise, I won't say that they're always a bad idea, but I tend to be pretty cautious uh, if a client wants to do one of these extreme things, and I really want to talk it through, and I want to understand what their motivation is, and I'm probably going to push back quite a bit so that we have a really good understanding of what this is going to look like beyond the 30 days or whatever.
Agreed. Agreed. And that resonates with what I was saying, kind of
Mm-hmm.
my answer is,
Mm-hmm.
where I think one of the most important things to talk about with a client is what you expect to
Right.
get out of this.
Right.
But then also, be realistic about
Mm-hmm.
where we're going to be when the time is up.
Mm-hmm.
And I do tend to have an approach of like, well, let's try it and see.
Mm-hmm.
So long as it's nutritionally sound,
Right.
there are not, health risks that are very obvious to this approach, and that includes mental health risks.
Exactly.
A lot of what I do is not just nutrients going in the body. A lot of it is developing a potentially damaging relationship with food, self body image, all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
Potentially damaging relationships with friends or family if
Mm-hmm.
you're engaging in some kind of extreme program or routine that doesn't help you cultivate the other parts of your life that make you a healthy human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's a really important conversation to have. And I think a lot of people might come to you or I expecting us to just go along with like, okay, well, this
Mm-hmm.
is how you do it, XYZ, instead of asking some of those deeper questions and getting, again, you were talking about kind of having that narrow focus on this is what I do and not taking a step back and kind of looking at the broader picture.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do agree with a client, like, okay, we can try this thing, this more extreme or less moderate approach, maybe a more rigid approach. These are the things to think about that are potential risks or, that I want you to be aware of. And let's maybe talk about how we might adjust this or how you're going to respond when something happens that throws you off that track and breaks one of your rules, because as we've already talked about, that can be a really challenging situation. I think on the positive side of doing like a big, a reboot or something we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast when I introduced this listener letter is this person pretty much was seeing that like a lot of patterns and behaviors did not align with beliefs.
Right.
I think that is almost a different scenario and maybe something I haven't quite, I don't encounter as much. I think as maybe somebody who just is like trying to find their path, those people that like truly have this epiphany and they're like, you know what? I need to just completely change over my life. It doesn't work for a lot of people because we have families and jobs and, other things at play.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that it can work though for somebody who really takes a hard look at their life and their behaviors and says, this is not who I want to be. It's not taking me any closer. I'm going to just overhaul it. I mean, make the change. And that to me is really empowering and motivating. And I have had a few of those clients where I'm like, wow, you are certain about this. And everything you've described kind of aligns with like just changing everything. If you think you can do it and if you're ready to tackle all this, let's do it.
Yeah.
And then we'll go through and we'll come up with all of the pieces. And that's what they need to really like kind of kickstart themselves. And then, there might be some thing. So let's say a person who is used to having fast food all the time. And I have had those clients that like, that's all they ate. And they decided.
Is there something wrong with that?
That's a separate podcast.
What are you talking about? It's an intervention.
You got some curly fries under the desk there, buddy, that you're
no
some tots. So if somebody like makes realizes like, man, this food doesn't even taste good to me. I don't feel good when I eat it. I don't want it. It's costing me a lot of money. I really would rather cook at home and like do this thing with my kids. Like they just have this vision. Let me tell you, having worked in the WIC program for so long and working with families that are on budgets, and that is a really hard habit to change, the fast food kind of and the eating out. I mean, for some families, I'm telling you, that is really tough because there are so many factors involved. It's not just the fact that you go to the grocery store and you buy the food. You have to plan meals and kind of know how to put things together. You have to have basic cooking skills. You have to be competent enough in the kitchen to actually like manage that food supply. You've got to please everybody. A lot of families will eat out because people can get what they want, you know?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
um,
There's no
so that,
fights over what we're
yeah,
eating because everybody gets their own choice. Yeah.
yeah, totally. And customizable, whatever.
Hmm.
So, just using that as an example, I think if you know, and I have had clients come to me and just say like, I am just, this is not working for me. Like I'm sick of it, but it's just this pattern or this habit they've developed. So they make this huge change and they're like, okay, I'm going to go to the grocery store. This is what I'm going to get. And I'll sit with them and like, we'll come up with a grocery list. We'll come up with the day of the week that they're going to go to the store.
Hmm.
And this is when you're going to do some of the washing and cutting and prep work that goes into some of this. And we can keep it super simple. But that still can be overwhelming for a busy family with multiple kids and, you know, trying to hold down jobs and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but it can be a really empowering change when they just suddenly say, like, I am just not going to buy fast
Right.
food for this much time.
Right.
And all of a sudden they're kind of forced into this world of like sink or swim, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So I that's just an example I can think of where it can work, like to do
Hmm.
that big change and just overhaul everything, and then they come back and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. And it really, I think, because it aligns with their belief system and what they want
Yeah.
for their family.
And that's a really, really good point. And I'm glad you made it because I think that's maybe the biggest difference is what is the motivation? What's the driving force behind this?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it I'm done with being this person and I'm tired of it. It doesn't serve me. It's not who I believe myself to be. Is it that kind of thing? Or is it fear? And I
Mm.
think that's the thing is that a lot of times people approach these big sweeping changes from a place of fear, right? And I think that's why we see this all or none stuff with these things. It's because as soon as it doesn't work, then that fear settles in of like, I'm not able to do this. And so I'm screwed. What do I do? Right. Where if it's in a place of this isn't who I am, and maybe it falls apart a little bit, it's still like, okay, then I'm going to fight for this more. Right. And
Hmm.
it's the same kind of approach, maybe, but from two completely different places. So I'm really glad you made that point. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
And it made me think of not my proudest moment as a father. This was probably 4 years ago. And it's always been like one of my highest priorities to have a really good relationship with my kids.
Hmm.
And I thought I was doing that. And I think Lila was 5.5, so around 3.5, 4 years ago. And she and I were just it was at this moment in our relationship where we were just knocking heads a lot. We were arguing a lot and we just were kind of disjointed. And one night she told Kathleen, she was like, I just don't really like daddy right now. And I
Mm.
don't like how we talk to each other, and this kind of stuff. And from my perspective, it was, well, I'm parenting the way I'm going to parent. And so you've got to fit the mold and, whatever. And so Kathleen told me that and it like broke my heart, right? I was just
Oh,
like,
geez.
oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like my kid doesn't even, well, she didn't feel like I liked her was the main thing because of
Yeah.
the way I was
Yeah.
talking to her and getting on her and that kind of stuff. And so for me, I wasn't going to approach that situation with these moderate changes, right? Because
Mm.
for me, it was like, oh, this is who I'm being. That's not who I want to be. This isn't the father I want to be, right? Like, I don't want the way that I parent to convey to my kid, I don't like you unless you do it exactly like I'm telling you to do, right?
Hmm.
So for me, it was okay, overhaul, sweeping change to the way that I interact with her and, correct behavior and talk to her about things. Like, I've got to do things different because it's a conflict with who I want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So it just made me think of that example of, yeah, I think there are some times when it's in direct conflict with how you see yourself or your belief system, that kind of stuff, where it's like, okay, I've got to drop what I've been doing because it's not serving me. It's actively
Hmm.
working against how I see myself or who I want to be or who I believe I am. And I've got to just do something different.
Yeah. That's a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good sharing.
Hey, thanks.
You're a good dad. You're a good dad.
Trying.
They just, gave you peanut butter stuffed French toast. They love you.
I have to say, just so I feel a little better, like our relationship is awesome now. It's like the
Yeah.
best. Yeah, we have a fantastic relationship. So,
Well, and
but
that's a cool like moral of the story is one of my favorite phrases with people is how's that working for you?
mm-hmm.
So when it comes to lifestyle changes or dietary habits or working out or big goals or anything, how's that working for you?
Right.
And we're all experts in our own lives, really. I mean, what Michael and I do more than anything is kind of act as a sounding board and bring our expertise to the
Yeah.
picture. So what we know about, fitness, health,
Mm-hmm.
nutrition, um, and just behavior change in general. But the individual is the expert in their lives and
Absolutely.
and how things are working for them. And so it's if you do decide you're going to make that extreme leap into just overhauling your life, ask yourself that question or have somebody who cares about you and is kind of walking along this journey with you, whether it be, a health coach or dietitian or personal trainer or a friend or family
Mm-hmm.
member. Have them have that conversation. How's this working for you?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that will help guide you too.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I didn't use those words, but that was the exact concept I asked myself. Like, how is the
Mm-hmm.
way I'm insisting on parenting working? Do I feel good about it? Is it making our days happier? Is it, is it making my child happy and healthy or not? And it was one of
Yeah.
those like, oh, this is not working at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a disaster.
Yeah.
So time to do something different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Cool.
Um, yeah. So I feel like we hit all the marks on that one. Do
Yeah,
you
I
have
think
anything
so.
else you're thinking?
I don't think so. I mean, I
That was
think
a
just, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that was such a great question and a great discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you so much to
Yes.
our listener for bringing that up because it it was I was kind of laughing when Michael and I were going back and forth, examining this before the podcast. I was like, there seems to be a moderate approach to everything. There's a moderate approach to moderation too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it speaks to the value of it.
Hmm.
And I think it's even with moderation, it's important to, like I was saying earlier, to not just look at that in the micro, right? It's to look at it in the macro and the consistency of it. And are things moderate over the course of a month or a week or a year or whatever? Because there may be some times where in the moment it's not, right? Like when you were doing your triathlete stuff, there was a lot of intensity to that,
No, it's
right?
super relaxed sport.
But there's
Surfers, triathletes, we're the same. We're the same kind of
we're all the
people.
same, yeah. But there's like at the same time when you're not in season, there's a lot of recovery. And in between races and workouts, there is a really intense, uh, maybe even extreme approach to recovery, right?
Hmm.
And so if you look at like, well, it's extreme output and then extreme input, well, you put those things together and maybe they're kind of moderate, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just so independent that I think people can often look at a situation and be like, wow, it's extreme. In what context?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and in
And
the moment, sure. But step
I'd like
back,
to
is it?
dive. I'd like to dive into that a little bit more in a future podcast. Just talking about one of the compliments I always received from people was you're so balanced, even with triathlon and with your life. It just seems like you have a lot of balance, and I am just like, no, no. There's a very extreme side of this, but then we get into like trade-offs and
Mhm.
being aware of where you're spending your resources. But yeah, we
Right.
can delve into that one
Yeah.
another time.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and please send us some more questions. So
Yeah.
Michael, do you have your meaning in the mundane this week?
You can go first.
Okay. You gotta think on that one, huh?
No, I'm just being polite. What are you talking
Chivalrous.
about?
So I was walking with some friends last week, and we were talking. All three of us used to be into Ironman and
Mhm.
triathlon, and one friend has done it since like the 90s, and like we all that's kind of how we met and what connected us. And now we all have stepped away from that. And we all have our own things that have taken that place. But one of my friends said, you know, I'll go on these ski trips and I'll still have like big weekends, because triathlon training like that eats up your entire weekend. That's all you
Sure.
do. Big bike
Sure.
rides, big runs, whatever. And she's like, I'll still have like these big weekends and I'll do these extreme skiing adventures and all this crazy stuff. And it doesn't mean anything. And I kind of stopped and I was like, yeah, actually, I think it means more because that tells me that it's really important to you to spend
Mhm.
your time with these other people doing this cool stuff that you just love to do. I mean, you're outside, you're
Mhm.
enjoying nature and the elements in whatever fashion you can find it. To me, that's more meaningful than with Ironman or triathlon where it's training. There's no matter how much you love the training, there's always that element of I have to do this,
Yeah.
where you're compelled to
Mhm.
do it. And you can't just like go out and go for a little, cruise just because you feel like
Mhm.
it. Whereas now where she's at is this her drill. And again, we're talking about like going out backcountry skiing, which I know is not mundane for a lot of people, but for
Mhm.
her it's like that's what they do every weekend. They'll do it
Yeah.
through June. Just go find snow. They're finding snow. And to me that was very meaningful, even though for her it was kind of like, oh, it doesn't really mean anything. I think what she meant was there's no competition attached to
Right.
it and there's no like end game, like you're not
Right.
training for a competition.
Right.
But to me it was it's very those things that we do that we just do for the pure joy of it,
Mhm.
whether they're big things or little things, have a lot of meaning in our lives.
Sure. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, that's good. So mine
Did
is,
you
which
think of yours?
I totally was not just making it up right now. Aaron, what are you talking about?
I know you.
I am always well prepared and organized.
Wait, you just told us you are not good at
I,
organization.
you heard me wrong.
Jeez.
No,
I'm going to play this back. I'm going to make you eat your words, buddy.
no, actually, mine is this is another bedtime one. 2 or 3 nights ago, I think. So Lila, my oldest, she just turned 9. We usually try to have her in bed like 8:45 ish, especially now that there's no school. It's usually about 9, right? But this particular night, I had her in bed like I was like 9:10, 9:15, something like that. Which I'm kind of the more strict one with bedtime. I'm like, come on, let's go get in bed, get your sleep, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like 9:15, and she says, "Daddy, will you lay down with me for a little bit?" Which I know means let's lay down and talk for a while, right? And in my head, I'm like, nope, it's 9:15, it's past your bedtime, you need to go to sleep. Da, da, da. And I was like, okay, for a few minutes. And which would have really been a moment easy for me to miss because
Mm.
understandable, it's past your bedtime, you need to go to sleep, right? And we wound up having this like 30, 35-minute conversation just about like struggles in life and hardships and how like they better equip us to be like more loving and compassionate, and they build empathy, and they're hard in the moment, and like we can easily squander like these difficult times if we don't learn the lessons that they provide for us. But if we learn the lessons, we become like better humans, and we're better equipped to like just be stronger and more empathetic and this kind of stuff and more caring. And it was this fantastic conversation that she was just like 100% engaged in. And as I kissed her goodnight, left the room and stuff, and I was just like, man, I almost missed that.
Yeah,
Like I was so close to missing that. And there's probably a good chance, like even a couple times I was like, no, it's late, you need to go to bed. And she was like, please,
right.
like I almost missed this like really significant moment. And just an ordinary bedtime. It's
Mhm.
something that she's really good at kind of suckering us in to stay up longer and that kind of stuff. And so it was just this thing that I'm like, yeah, I'm used to this. Okay, you're just trying to stay up later, and you're cute, so
Yeah.
you're using it to your advantage. But it was this just ordinary thing that I almost, I almost completely missed this really, for me, it was a really significant moment. And I don't know that she'll remember it when she's older. She may. It was a really intense in a good way conversation, but at the very least, it was like me getting to plant seeds in her of like being resilient and not being
Yeah.
afraid when things are hard and that kind of stuff. And I was like, man,
That's good.
just about missed that whole thing.
Yeah, and you got to take advantage of those little
Yeah.
glimmers of,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
insight. That's good.
Yeah. So
Good
cool.
job.
All right.
Yeah.
So like Aaron said, yeah, please like send us your questions. We love, because it's so easy, I think, from our standpoint to just like assume people know things or assume what people want to hear and that kind of stuff. And I think we have a pretty good understanding, but we're not any of you. And so like we would love to have your questions, your thoughts expanding on something we've talked about, all that kind of stuff, because I think that's just going to make this a better podcast, and that's our whole objective, is to equip all of you with tools and strategies and concepts to live life more fully and more healthily for the long term. And your input in how to make that happen is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah. So please subscribe if you
Mm-hmm.
like what you hear, and leave us a review on whatever platform. That's super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see you next week,
See
or
you next week.
you'll
Yeah.
hear us next week.
There you go.
Thanks, you guys.
Take care.